Hey everyone, this is Derek Bros of the Conscious Resistance Network. Today we're going to be talking about Bill Gates. We're going to talk about his family, his history. We're going to talk about some of the things he's said and now some of the lies he's telling. Before we do that though, I want to remind you guys to bookmark theconsciousresistance.com, which is your home for all of our latest content, books, documentaries, articles, essays, podcasts. We've got 4 different podcasts that broadcast through our network and lots of content from the last 10 years that you can dive into. You can also follow us on Minds. You can follow us on Hive because we left Steemit. We're now on the Hive blockchain. You can follow us through our Discord channel. You can sign up for text list updates right here. And you can follow us now on float.app/consciousresistance. And of course on BitChute and YouTube. And if you want to support, do so at patreon.com/DerekBros. All right, let's get right into this. This morning, Sunday, April 12th, Bill Gates gave an interview on the BBC. And I want you to listen to this interview and hear what he says. He mentions vaccines a couple times, but the most crucial point comes in the last 20 to 30 seconds. So check this out.
Well, there's the period when I and other health experts were saying that this is the greatest potential downfall the world faced, going back quite a ways with a speech in 2015 and a New England Journal of Medicine article about the specific thing. So, we definitely will look back and wish we had invested more so that we could quickly have all the diagnostics, drugs, and vaccines. We underinvested, which was my goal, was to get that to happen. We did do CEPI, which helped with some of the vaccine platforms, but not even 5% what we could have done. Then there's the period where the virus shows up in those first few months. What were the tests prepared? Did countries think through getting their ICU and ventilator capacity up? There'll be time for those postmortems. Very few countries are going to get an A grade for what that scrambling looked like. And now here we are. We didn't simulate this. We didn't practice. So both the health policies and economic policies, we find ourselves in uncharted territory.
Let's just rewind that real quick and hear that again.
We didn't simulate this. We didn't practice. So both we didn't practice. So both the
We didn't simulate this. We didn't practice this. Now, everybody who's listening to this channel, even if you're new, I'm sure you've heard of Event 201, and you know that that is an outright lie. For those who are unaware, here we are at the Center for Health Security.org/Event 201, and let's just read a little bit about this. The Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, in partnership with the World Economic Forum and, oh, look at this, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, hosted Event 201, a high-level pandemic exercise on October 18, 2019. So Gates is on BBC this morning claiming, we didn't prepare, we're underfunded, I thought this was going to happen, but nobody listened to me, and we didn't simulate this, we didn't practice this. So, as he says, the health policies and economic policies, we find ourselves in uncharted territory. Guys, this is just like the 9/11 story, where the goal is to convince the public that the government was just kind of bumbling around and didn't know what was going to happen, and so nobody could have been prepared for this. Just like Condoleezza Rice after 9/11 said, I don't think anybody could have imagined this happening, meaning could imagine that planes could crash into buildings, even though they also, just like Event 201, simulated hijacked aircraft flying into planes, flying into buildings. So I covered this recently as well in one of our videos, and we showed this, that actually the World Economic Forum on March 13th came out openly and said, look, yeah, we ran a massive viral pandemic simulation. Here's what we learned, and they talk all about it. They can't, it's no longer a sort of hidden secret only in the conspiracy realm. But Bill Gates goes on TV this morning and says, we didn't simulate this, we didn't practice this. Of course, none of the journalists, the wannabe journalists, these fake broadcasters, will ever challenge him or question him and ask him about Event 201 and say, well, actually, didn't you simulate this, in fact, this exact thing? And so before we move on to a bigger point, we're going to look into a little bit of Bill Gates' history, and then we're going to connect this. This came out last month from The Nation, and they actually did a pretty good article. And this is mainstream, so I would say it goes even deeper than what they're willing to touch on here. But it says, Bill Gates' charity paradox. A Nation investigation illustrates the moral hazards surrounding the Gates Foundation's $50 billion charitable enterprise. And what they talk about here is that there's a 3-hour documentary called Inside Bill's Brain that was released via Netflix. Anybody notice how documentaries are being used as propaganda? I mean, it's always been that way, but there was a 4-part documentary on Hillary that came out on Hulu, and it's, I'm sure, filled with propaganda. But this documentary, Inside Bill's Brain, in one part, they show that director David Guggenheim underlines Gates' expansive intellect by interviewing Bernie Noe, described as a friend of Gates. That's a gift to read 150 pages an hour. I'm going to say it's 90% retention, kind of extraordinary. What the director didn't tell the audience is that Noe is the principal of Lakeside School, a private institution to which the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has given $80 million. So perhaps he has some conflict of interest in promoting Gates as just this brilliant person. Gates is touted as to all of us as being the most intelligent person in the world, or one of them. He rubs elbows with Warren Buffett and a lot of these billionaires. And many of you also know he rubbed elbows with Jeffrey Epstein as well. Now that's being forgotten now that Bill Gates is being touted as the hero. Nobody's talking about that. And they go a little deeper into this. I do highly recommend reading the whole thing. They say right here, through an investigation of more than 19,000 charitable grants that the Gates Foundation has made over the last 2 decades, the nation has uncovered close to $2 billion in tax-deductible charitable donations to private companies, including some of the largest businesses in the world, such as GlaxoSmithKline, Unilever, IBM, and NBC Universal Media. NBC Universal Media, of course, is all kinds of media outlets, which are now putting Gates on TV, which are tasked with developing new drugs, improving sanitation in the world, developing financial products, and spreading the good news about his work. So he funds all these different projects and then funds the media to help promote him and his work. The Gates Foundation even gave $2 million to participant media to promote Davis Guggenheim's previous documentary, Waiting for Superman, which pushes one of the foundation's signature charity efforts of charter schools. So it's a big circle, a network of Gates' money and nonprofits, NGOs, think tanks. And for those of you who've been around long enough, you know this is how the elite operate. They pretend to be philanthropists, and they funnel their money in through NGOs and philanthropic outlets and use that to influence the world around us. The nation found close to $250 million in charitable grants from the Gates Foundation to companies in which the foundation holds corporate stocks and bonds. Merck, Novartis, GlaxoSmithKline, Vodafone, Sanofi, Ericsson, LG, Medtronic, Teva, and numerous startups, with the grants directed at projects like developing new drugs and health monitoring systems. So some people would say, okay, well, this guy's a philanthropist. He's trying to funnel money into all these different organizations. I mean, he gave a speech about this. He cares about it. But it's deeper than that. A foundation giving a charitable grant to a company that it partly owns and stands to benefit from financially would seem like an obvious conflict of interest. But judging from the sparse rules that Congress has written concerning private foundations and the IRS's light enforcement of them, many in the federal government do not appear to see it this way. The Gates Foundation did not respond to specific questions about its work with the private sector, nor would it provide its own accounting of how much money it has given to for-profit companies, saying that, quote, many grants are implemented through a mixture of nonprofit and for-profit partners, making it difficult to evaluate exact spending. And in layman's term, that means they're hiding their money. They're able to shift funds around so that nobody can really tell where the money's going and what it's influencing. At business-friendly events, however, Bill Gates openly promotes his foundation's work with companies. In speeches delivered at the American Enterprise Institute and Microsoft in 2013 and 2014, he trumpeted the lives of his foundation was saving. In one speech, he said $10 million and another $6 million through partnerships with pharmaceutical companies. He's just throwing numbers around. Yet the foundation is doing more than simply partnering with companies. It is subsidizing their research costs, opening up markets for their products, and bankrolling their bottom line in ways that, by and large, have never been publicly examined, even as you and I are subsidizing this work through taxpayer dollars. And then they go in here, let me back up a little bit, to this charity paradox. Through the Gates family and Gates Foundation, though the Gates family and Gates Foundation have given away tens of billions of dollars, their assets have continued to grow, raising questions about the long-term influence of billionaire philanthropy in American politics. And they go into Bill Gates' taxes and how it's very difficult for anybody to know how much taxes he's actually paying. And look, I'm not a big supporter of taxation in general, but this guy is obviously a part of this elite. He's a part of the rich billionaire class, and he's tied into the system. Bill Gates is not just a nobody either. I mean, many people have discussed how his family had some involvement in Planned Parenthood. Some of you that might bother, others it might not. But what about a different family connection? let's take a look over here, and you can find this in many places. This is not, conspiracy. This is coming from famouskin.com, but you can find it many other places, as I said. The family relationship of Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, and Nelson Rockefeller, the 41st U.S. vice president. He's a seventh cousin 3 times removed. No, that's not the closest connection, right? But if you follow, I did some digging, and I know others have done some digging. Bill Gates has a history of bankers involved in his family. There's a Federal Reserve chairman or a Federal Reserve president involved in this family. And for those who understand that the power elite, they didn't just appear in the 20th and 21st century. They've been around for centuries. They've been around for generations. They have been out there working to push their agenda forward one way or another. And they do this through long-term planning. They do this through marrying within each other's families and keeping things within the circle. I'm not going to sit here and claim I know how far back this goes. Some would claim so. I do not know that. But I do know that Bill Gates is not just some nobody who happened to get rich from building, Microsoft and being involved in that. And even that's questionable. But yes, he is a 7th cousin, 3 times removed, to the Rockefellers. Now, the reason that is intriguing at the least is this: the lockstep simulation scenario, which some of you have heard of. Maybe some of you, of course, have heard of Event 201, but less people have heard of lockstep. And then some of you have reached out to me. I've been studying it and looking at it, and I appreciate everybody who's been sending me the documents. This is coming from Global Research article about it. We'll just read a little bit of this, and then we'll go to the actual document itself. It says, few are aware that the epidemic playing out in China and 24 other countries, including the U.S., is unfolding in line with a decade-old simulation titled Lockstep, developed by the Rockefeller Foundation in conjunction with the Global Business Network. The scenario, one of 4 included in a publication called Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development, was published in 2010, and it describes a coronavirus-like pandemic that becomes the trigger for the imposition of police-state controls on movement, economy, and other areas of society. The lockstep scenario describes a world of tighter, top-down government control and more authoritarian leadership with limited innovation and growing citizen pushback. In 2012, i.e., 2 years after the report's publication, an extremely virulent and deadly strain of influenza originating with wild geese brings the world to its knees, infecting 20% of the population and killing 8 million people in just 7 months. The majority of them healthy young adults, according to the simulation. It devastates global economies and ruptures international trade. But not everyone is hit equally. Countries of Africa, Southeast Asia, and Central America suffer the worst in the absence of official containment protocols. And it wouldn't be the Rockefeller Foundation if someone wasn't licking their lips at the thought of a mass die-off in the global south. But Western democracies also pay the ultimate price. According to the document, the United States' initial policy of strongly discouraging citizens from flying proved deadly even in its leniency, accelerating the spread of the virus not just within the U.S., but across borders, the report warns. But to remove such obstacles as individual rights, and you have a recipe for surviving and even thriving. The foundation says, quote, a few countries did fare better, China in particular. The Chinese government's quick imposition and enforcement of mandatory quarantine for all citizens, as well as its instant and near hermetic sealing up of all borders, saved millions of lives, stopping the spread of the virus far earlier than in other countries and enabling a swifter post-pandemic recovery. So again, just like the World Health Organization keeps sending the message that China is doing things right, that China is a good nation. Of course, China is a totalitarian nation that has complete control of their people's lives. They have a social credit score. They do not have press freedoms. People are grabbed off the streets. We saw videos of how they handled this when this thing was first going down. They were sealing people's doors shut. They were welding them shut. They were grabbing people off the street. And it's very important to understand that that's the model that is being upheld. I do believe, as some have said, that we're witnessing the slow, deliberate destruction of the United States as the world superpower and the ramping up of putting China in that number one position. And not just China's economy, but China's surveillance measures, their tactics in general, are going to become the norm. And we're seeing that already. I mean, guys, I've been posting articles about the U.S. and UK considering immunity passports. This is all coming from Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development, the Rockefeller Foundation. So again, let's go back a little bit. Bill Gates goes on TV this morning, says we did not simulate or practice this. But in fact, we know the Gates Foundation funded and hosted Event 201, which simulated a pandemic exercise in October 18, 2019, that said that this would spread around the world for a year and a half and kill millions and millions of people. And they even admit this here. And then we look into Bill Gates' history, and he's hiding all kinds of money. There's a lot of propaganda surrounding him, trying to promote him as the hero, even though he's connected to Epstein and the pedophile network. Do we know for sure that Gates trafficked kids? No, I'm not saying that. But he definitely knew Jeffrey Epstein and is trying to downplay it. Then we look into some of his history, and he's connected to the Rockefellers. The same Rockefeller Foundation, the same Rockefeller family that in 2010 hold their own simulation, which included the lockstep scenario, which you can find here on page 18, and all of this of course will be in the show notes as always. Let's go down. Let me just do a search, lockstep, and we'll go down here and find lockstep. Lockstep, a world of tighter top-down government control and more authoritarian leadership with limited innovation and growing citizen pushback. They also had several different things. They talk about the smart scramble, clever together, hack attack, but apparently the elites have chosen lockstep and Event 201. And it describes many of the things that we are seeing as far as shutting down of borders, requiring, let me see if I can just search thermal and see if that comes up. Let me see, temperature, maybe that's what it is. Okay, here we go. During the pandemic, national leaders around the world, let me zoom that in for you guys so you can see better. During the pandemic, national leaders around the world flexed their authority and imposed airtight rules and restrictions, from the mandatory wearing of face masks to body temperature checks at the entries to communal spaces like train stations and supermarkets. These are ideas that we're seeing being floated right now. Even after the pandemic faded, this more authoritarian control and oversight of citizens and their activities stuck and even intensified. In order to protect themselves from the spread of increasingly global problems, from pandemics and transnational terrorism to environmental crises and rising poverty, leaders around the world took a firmer grip on power. At first, the notion of a more controlled world gained wide acceptance and approval. Citizens willingly gave up their sovereignty and their privacy to a more paternalistic state in exchange for greater safety and stability. Citizens were more tolerant and even eager for top-down direction and oversight, and national leaders had more latitude to impose order in the ways they saw fit. In developed countries, this heightened oversight took many forms. Biometric IDs for all citizens, for example, and tighter regulation of key industries whose stability was deemed vital to national interests. And many developed countries enforced cooperation with a suite of new regulations and agreements, slowly but steadily restored order and importantly economic growth. Across the developing world, however, the story was different. Top-down authority took different forms in different countries, hinging largely on the capacity, caliber, and intentions of their leaders. In countries with strong and thoughtful leaders, citizens' overall economic status and quality of life increased. In India, for example, air quality drastically improved after 2016 when the government outlawed high-emitting vehicles. In Ghana, the introduction of ambitious government programs to improve basic infrastructure and assure the availability of clean water for all her people led to a sharp decline in waterborne diseases. But more authoritarian leadership worked less well, and in some cases tragically, in countries run by irresponsible elites who used their increased power to pursue their own interests at the expense of the citizens. And they go on to describe this further, talking about potential violence at the World Cup game in 2018. Maybe they're predicting the future here. Of course, this will be in the show notes, and you need to read it. It's not long at all, guys. But let's just maybe wrap up this part here. It says, by 2025, people seem to be growing weary of so much top-down control and letting leaders and authorities make choices for them. Whenever national interests clashed with individual interests, there was conflict. Sporadic pushback became increasingly organized and coordinated as disaffected youth and people who had seen their status and opportunities slip away, largely in developing countries, incited civil unrest. In 2026, protesters in Nigeria brought down the government, fed up with the entrenched cronyism and corruption. Even those who liked the greater stability and predictability of this world began to grow uncomfortable and constrained by so many tight rules and by the strictness of national boundaries. The feeling lingered that sooner or later something would inevitably upset the neat order of the world's governments had worked so hard to establish. So, in review, Bill Gates is on TV lying about the fact that his organization helped fund a pandemic exercise which simulated a coronavirus spreading around the world and killing millions of people. He is playing a lot of funny money, nonprofit, NGO, um, charity games with his funds. There's a lot of propaganda surrounding him, trying to make him be the hero of the world right now. He has familial connections to the Rockefeller Foundation, which, for those who know the history of the Rockefeller Foundation, have been involved in all kinds of tomfoolery throughout history. And in 2010, they were involved in this, Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development, which simulated lockstep, which in some ways very much represents what we're seeing in the world today. I think we are witnessing a combination of Event 201 and lockstep coming together through the Rockefeller Foundation and through Bill Gates. This is a very dangerous time. We need people to see this. I'm inviting you and humbly requesting that you share this information far and wide. I know there's other videos out there of people talking about this, but I'm trying to just stick to the facts and stick to the things that we know and get you to think and ask questions. If you're just waking up, if you just started to tune into the world in the last year, 2 years or so, there's a lot of scary things happening, and I know it can be overwhelming. But the only thing that's going to change the world is if we come together, if we have the strength, the courage, and the power within our own heart and mind to push past the people who call you crazy, push past the people who call you conspiracy theorists, push back past the fear of losing friends and family who might think you're delusional, and instead do what you know is right, and that is to question the system that is being built all around us right now. It has been happening since the days of 9/11 and even in the days before 9/11, but it's increasingly happening right now. It's happening in front of our faces. The technocracy is being built, and the technocrats, Bill Gates, Bezos, Zuckerberg, Rockefeller, the people I wrote about in my book, How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State, are being propped up as the heroes when they are in fact involved in the creation of this. I don't know if that means they let loose this virus, or if perhaps they knew something was going to come, or even if they had no idea, but they're simply taking advantage of it. It sure would be some hell of a coincidence that they funded these exercises and things like this just happen to happen. But for the moment, we don't have that smoking gun that proves they released it or they were aware of it. But we do know they're taking advantage of it. And that should be enough to scare the crap out of you, because the consideration of immunity passports, immunity cards, biometrics, mandatory vaccinations, these things are happening right now, friends. And if we don't push back in some way, we are doomed. Thank you guys so much for listening. Remember that we can do this. We have to push past the fear and claim our true power and recognize we have everything we need within our own hearts. Until next time, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free. Peace.